The Real Estate Agents Licensing Board of Fiji has a range of duties which include licensing real estate agents, granting permits as well as certificates of approval for salesperson, amongst others. However, due to ongoing compliance issues within the real estate industry, RealB has recently signed MOUs with both the Fiji National Provident Fund and the Fijian Competition and Consumer Commission. Tonight with us, we have our guest, the acting CEO of RealB Fiji, Virisila Tuimanu, to elaborate more on this and other matters related to the real estate market. Good evening, and thank you for taking time out to come on the show. Getting into it, most people don't realize what RealB is, what its functions are, and what it's supposed to do.
Thank you, Geraldine. The Real Estate Agents Licensing Board, in fact, is a statutory organization which comes under the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Tourism. We have been mandated by the 2006 Real Estate Agents Act, which basically covers the powers and the functions of the board, as you've just earlier mentioned. They grant licenses to real estate agents. They grant certificates of approval to salespeople and permits. And permits are usually for short-term transactions. And apart from that, they actually have disciplinary powers under the Act as well. So the disciplinary powers will, in fact, cover either cancellation or suspension of licenses should the licensees, which are the real estate agents, be found to be in breach of the Act.
Right, so can you, for the benefit of our viewers, tell us about some of the powers that are given to you by the Act? You did mention a few just a while ago.
Delegated to me?
Yes.
No.
In fact, delegated to the board by the Act.
The board has its powers and functions, and then the board too, actually in the Act, could delegate some of the powers to the registrar. So the registrar at the moment grants certificates of approvals to salespersons and also grants renewals for salespeople. Otherwise, the other functions of the board still remain with the board at the moment.
Mm-hmm. Looking at granting certificates of approval for a license, I understand that it's quite a rigorous process, quite a lot of applications that do come through, but how do you screen them?
Actually, there is a whole lot of checklist, things to be fulfilled by them. This has been approved by the board. In fact, one of them is tax compliance and police clearance, and these are very important ones. And then some of them, given the fact if a salesperson joins another new firm from our previous real estate company, we would usually require a employer's reference, just to be clear that they've been released properly, they've resigned properly. It is quite hectic, but then that's how it works at the moment.
So let's get to the crux of the memorandums of the understanding, or the MOUs rather. Let's talk about why there was a need for these MOUs in the first place that you signed with the FNPF and FCCC.
One of the KPIs of the agency was to have mutual cooperation agreements between the other stakeholder agencies. So over the years, we've actually signed one with Fiji Revenue and Customs Services. We've signed the last one with FCCC, which is the Fiji Consumer and Competition Commission, and the latest one was with the Fiji National Provident Fund. So basically, with the Fiji Consumer and Competition Commission, we actually share responsibility, which is consumer protection. They have a greater responsibility because they have to look after competition, fair trade, and consumer protection. We are part of the powers of the board as well, is to look that the consumer's interests are protected when it comes to buying and selling of properties. So it has been talks that were going probably 1 or 2 years ago, so we were lucky enough that 1 month ago we signed with FCCC and then with the Fiji National Provident Fund as well.
And so this mutual cooperation that you speak of, yes, since the Act has been around since 2006, is this the first time that this is happening? And if yes, then why now?
Yeah, that's a good question. The MOUs have always been something that the board has actually, wanted to achieve. But then, negotiations were taking place, and then another board came in, and then they had to, restart the need again to do this. And then we were lucky enough that over the last month we've signed 2 MOUs.
Looking at the MOU that's been signed with FNPF, it says ongoing compliance issues with the main issue at hand. What does that mean? What sort of compliance issues?
FNPF a few months ago had actually brought out that their legislation, which is the FNPF Act, has provisions for employees, defines employees as people that do receive commission as well. So they approached the board, and we took awareness programs around the country, advising real estate agents that this was going to happen, and they understood the fact that their responsibility not only lies under the 2006 Real Estate Agents Act, but they have other obligations over other legislations that are in place. So, for example, tax obligations, and then when the FNPF came in, through this educational process that we underwent, the agents were advised. Came as a shock for some of them, but then those are certain obligations that they actually have to comply with when it comes to FNPF contribution.
Like you mentioned, with the tax compliance and with contribution, of course, could you explain a little bit more? As far as I know, I think it's about those who are real estate agents previously were not considered employees, and therefore the real estate companies would not be paying their employee and employer contributions. To sort of get to the crux of the matter, why was this brought forward now?
It is, I think, the findings of FNPF now. They have actually saw the need. They looked into their legislation, they saw the need, and then they have reached out to the Real Estate Agents Licensing Board. Then our industry has been advised accordingly.
So the FNPF has noticed non-compliance with real estate agents. That has prompted these memorandums of understanding?
No, the need for memorandum of understandings that have always been there. We needed to have, MOUs with our stakeholder agencies. The compliance issue is something that has, come together with the need to form a MOU.
I'd really like to dig into more with that particular tax compliance and also employer and employee contributions, but we'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, Virisila, looking at what we were talking about in the previous segment, compliance issues with FNPF and why there was a need for an MOU that was drawn up. One of them was, of course, tax compliance, and something in particular that really caught my attention was the employer and the employee contributions. Now, we've stated before that real estate agents were not considered employees, they were considered contractors, which is why they were not paying their contributions before. However, now, because of this, they do have to. This has been backdated all the way till 2011. How does that work, and what do you think that's going to mean for real estate agents, for brokers, and for companies?
The information that we've gathered from FNPF is that they actually are complying. Some companies are actually paying back as far as 2011 or 2012 goes. And the definition of employees, yes, the definition of employee under the FNPF Act, we've been advised that it actually covers any person that is receiving commission. So upon that definition, I believe that's where FNPF has actually gone out to do compliance work with the real estate industry. And the issue has started probably 1 year ago, not more than 1 year ago, where the problem was identified, the issues were identified. Like I said, we went out, we tried to run educational programs. FNPF also accompanied us and sort of explained to the real estate agents and to the industry what actually was going to take place. And I know that the Real Estate Association of Fiji stood up and probably said a few comments against what actually was going to take place, but then that's their statutory requirements, and they need to comply with that. And we have received news that some of them are really have gotten into paying back the contributions that they owe to FNPF.
Are you able to give us rough numbers about the companies that have complied? I mean, obviously, when this news was made apparent to some of these smaller companies, they can't be very happy about it.
There's about 80 licensed companies, and then I think there's not more than 10 that hold a lot of salespeople under their employ. The number I'm not too sure, but I think it's up to 10.
10 companies that are not compliant.
That are compliant, that have started repaying FNPF.
So making a dent somehow. But looking at how these real estate agents actually make their money, because I wasn't privy to this information until recently, that not all real estate companies pay their employees as a salary. Most of them actually have to work on commission basis. Yes. Ergo, it becomes a bit of a problem when it comes in terms of complying with contributions. How do you think that's going to be solved?
I'm not too sure how FNPF needs to answer this question, but then, from the knowledge from our perspective, they will have to pay whatever that, they are required to pay FNPF. And FNPF, that is why FNPF actually has had this MOU agreement signed with us, just for verification purposes, exchange of information on real estate agents. They would want to see, the valid real estate agents that are out there, how many salespersons are under their employ.
But just from the perspective of RealB and the board, does the Real Estate Agents Act have a requirement that real estate agents must pay their salespersons certain salaries, or is it okay for them to keep operating on a commission basis?
For salespersons, they are employees of real estate agents. And if I went back to your question, yes, salespeople, most of them, I'm being advised, do live on commission, and there are a few that are salaried staff as well. Some companies have salaried staff as well.
So it's the prerogative of the particular agent?
Yes, who is actually the licensee, the holder of the license.
Staying on that track, do you see in the future this being amended so that those who will be required now to pay their contributions will be paid a salary so that it makes it easier for them to pay their contributions?
Maybe it would not be the prerogative of the board. Maybe the other stakeholder agencies will need to look at that, but at the moment we will just concentrate on the licensing part of these agents.
So I understand that the Real Estate Agents Act deals separately with the duties and the responsibilities of agents, and it refers to real estate brokers as salespersons. Could you, for the benefit of our viewers who may not be aware, according to the provision, what's the difference between someone who's just an agent and someone who's a salesperson?
The real estate agent is the licensee. In the Act, he or she holds the license, and then if he wishes to employ some other people to do the real estate work with him or her, they are called the salespersons or salespeople. Usually, I think there's always a mix-up on if a salesperson is coming to you to sell property, people would think that they are all agents, but there is only one real estate agent supposedly in every company, and that real estate agent is the one who holds the license, whilst the other people that are employed under him or her are salespeople.
What other issues were raised with this, not raised, but rather are being addressed with this MOU? In particular, could you give us specifics?
The FNPF?
Yes.
Yes.
The FNPF MOU, basically, together with the FCCC MOU, like I said, it's just a single thread running along this MOU, which is information sharing. The agencies will be sharing information that we would like, and we would be sharing information on the agents. So for FNPF, it's supposedly supposed to be verification purposes for things that they would want. And for FCCC, I believe if they have complaints against some agents and if they need information from us, that information is readily available. And some of the information with us is actually public information. You can get into our website. You can call the office. It is public information to ask whether someone holds a valid or expired license, and that information is actually public information.
Well, we've explored the MOU with FNPF, and as you've mentioned, you've also signed an MOU with FCCC, looking at creating a fair and competitive real estate market in the country. There's so much that needs to be discussed on that, but we'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Verisila, looking at the MOU that's been signed with FCCC, you've mentioned that this is the second one that's been signed, apart from the one with FNPF. You have been trying to liaise with FCCC, to create a more stable real estate market in the country. Now, there have been concerns that have been raised by the ordinary citizen, saying that it's not really suitable, it's not healthy for the market right now, for them rather, to participate in the market, buying, selling, rental purposes. Why do you think that this MOU took so long to come into effect, or not rather come into effect, but to actually eventuate?
Actually, it hasn't taken long, but the thing is, like I said, we started negotiating over a couple of months ago, and we had agreed, we had to take it to our lawyers as well, and then we had agreed on, the agreed provisions, and it is basically in place. So what actually, the common thread again running in between these two agencies is that both the parties believe that the real estate industry should be competitive, should be efficient, and should promote fair trade. So in between the two agencies, what will happen is that if they need information from us on real estate agents, we will be happy to supply that, and vice versa, if we need information from them on some issues. Interestingly, one of the components of the MOU is when it comes to policy questions, broad policy questions. We are going to request them for their advice, and vice versa. If they need so, they will approach us. So I believe we've had a conference 2 days ago, and what the board would be interested to do is having advertising guidelines for real estate agents. So in this aspect, the board cannot do it alone, so we will need to consult FCCC, and by that this MOU is already in place too.
I guess the essence of, something that Geraldine was trying to get into earlier is the underlying issues that exist within the industry that the public may not be aware of. There's a lot of stuff being said on social media and public forums about how the real estate industry in Fiji is struggling, how it's a difficult market to get into. And I was also looking at the statement by the FCCC CEO, who said that the FCCC would be launching an investigation into the real estate sector in Fiji. Why was there a need for all of this?
Well, if FCCC says that they will need to investigate some real estate agents, obviously there is a reason. There are probably breaches in their decree, the FCCC decree, or there are probably some issues that have been raised by the public as in regards to, the performance of people's duties in as far as real estate activities are concerned.
Well, looking at creating a fair and competitive market, one thing that really does get to me is nowadays when you try to get out and get into the real estate market, you want to do a little bit of buying, a little bit of selling, maybe even renting. It becomes a little more difficult for the ordinary citizen to break into that because, Ziad, I'm sure you may agree with this, when you try to go out and get a house that you're trying to buy without a real estate agent being your middleman, you may get a cheaper rate. But when you try to go through an agency or a real estate agent salesperson, that number pretty much doubles. Now, why is that not being regulated? I can understand that you need the salesperson to make some sort of commission, but some of the numbers are just astronomical.
Well, obviously there will be a difference. If somebody goes out and uses the real estate agent services, the price of the property would have to, increase a little bit because the person would be charging commission. And if you went out on your own, you would find that, they're probably reasonable according to one's taste. Commission is not regulated at the moment. There has been a lot of discussions on it, whether to regulate or not regulate. What is happening at the moment is that the larger firms would have a certain percentage they would charge, certain established fees they would charge together with the commission, and the smaller firms, the sole practitioners, are the ones that will have to vary the commissions that they charge.
Yeah, I mean, because even hearing the name of a real estate agent for a middle income owner or low income owner is a bit off-putting, because as soon as you hear about real estate agent, you also automatically think about the commission that comes with it. So is there a plan with the RealB to make real estate, the real estate sector more appealing to middle and low income earners?
Of course. We've got the commission, commission discussions going on. We'd like to, I think that the board will need to see and finalize its decision on it, whether it needs to be regulated or not regulated. That will be in a couple of months' time. They will need to, discuss again the disadvantages and the benefits we will get if commission is regulated. But on that, some countries have actually done that. They have regulated their commission. They have put it out for basically 5-10 years. After that, then they have deregulated it to check if the market is okay, and then they will deregulate the commission. We have New Zealand, we have Australia. We're trying to learn from the practices that they do. They are larger markets, obviously, than ours, but then we actually are learning from their practices. In some countries, they have tiered commission. The higher the property, the lesser the commission that is being charged. But then it's a learning curve for Fiji, and I think the board needs to make a decision in the future.
Just one more question before we cut to break later on. Foreign investors, do you think that that is a factor that has played a role in pretty much inflating the market rate in the real estate industry?
If we're to believe what everyone's saying in the country.
Foreign investment. Foreign investment, if it came through the board, I would be looking at the angle if a foreigner needs to open up a business in Fiji, he or she needs to follow requirements from Investment Fiji. And Investment Fiji, obviously the Department of Immigration, and then to us, the licensing board. That if a real estate agent who was a foreigner who wanted to come into Fiji and work as a real estate agent, if that's how...
Well, I was actually hoping that you would clear up a little bit of doubt amongst the ordinary Fijians. Some of us do have to think whether or not we have investors and also people who would like to buy into the country. And then that's where real estate agents would sort of have a bit of a mindset where it's a foreign investor, we're going to give them a higher price, make a bigger commission. And if that happens once, it's going to happen twice, and it multiplies, and then the next thing you know, something that costs, say, $10,000 goes up to about $50,000.
Well, I can't speak for agents at the moment, but, really, we haven't received any complaints on that area or someone showing concerns. Not at the moment.
Well, thank you for that. I've heard that you had a conference earlier on, but we'll talk more on that after the break. Welcome back. Ziad, you still had a question pending from the previous segment.
One of the highlights of the MOU between RealB and FCCC was the information sharing aspect, where when required, RealB would provide the information to the FCCC for successful implementation of the MOU and consumer protection. What kind of information is this that will be shared?
We actually have information on all our real estate agents, so that information is available to us. The validity of their licenses and how many people do they employ, and whatnot. So if FCCC requires of us that information because maybe there is a complaint against one of those agents using their FCCC avenue, then we will be able to supply that information given that the MOU is in place.
And is there a possibility of information leakage, confidential information that perhaps real estate agents don't want leaked? Are there measures taken to protect that information?
The MOU specifically talks about no third-party involvement, so both the parties have actually responsibilities under the MOU to look after that information, to consider it confidential. But like I said, some of the information is public information. You go to our website, you can see who holds the license today, how far it's going to be valid. Those information are available on our website.
Before we move on to the conference that took place earlier on, just one last question to wrap that up. What about non-compliance? What are the penalties and disciplinary actions that Real B takes?
The disciplinary actions are properly laid out in the Act. One of it is in breach. Should somebody be found to be in breach, license could be suspended or license could be cancelled. So before making the decision, before the board makes the decision, investigation is takes place, and then you're given a time for hearing of your submission. If you have to, some people are usually represented by counsel. They hire their lawyers to come through the board seats and makes those decisions. So for over the last 1 year, I should say, there has been not more than 5 cancellation of licenses. I think the board doesn't promote cancellation, but the board actually sees that each and every person complies with the laws that are in place in order to carry out their responsibilities.
Well, moving on to the 2018 Real Estates Conference for Agents and Salespersons. A bit of a mouthful there. It took place recently. What was the need for this conference, and what was discussed? What were the outcomes?
Good. We've actually over the last 2 years had national workshops over the main divisions, but this year the board had thought that we should have one central conference, somewhere central where all agents and the salespeople could gather, and obviously the branch managers. So they say it was held at the Pearl Resort 2 days ago, and title being Realtors, Professionalism and Ethics. So the Honourable Minister for Trade had officiated the event. It was a very, very big turnout, and people had come in to listen to topics like, so what we did was we formulated topics that surrounded the theme. So we had topics on compliance with regulatory authorities. Of course, we brought in our stakeholder agencies to present, and then we had topics on understanding professional ethics, ethical advertising. There was an interesting one on whether commission should be regulated or not. It was a huge turnout, and the feedback was really good as well.
When you say that you had relevant stakeholders that had come in, other bodies as well, who were they? FCCC,
of course, FNPF, the police, and Fiji Financial Intelligence Unit. These are all our stakeholders which work together. And by the way, we actually had an MOU signed with FIU as well over a couple of months ago. And so these are very important agencies that we work together.
So let's talk about some of the outcomes of this conference. What are some things that you were able to achieve?
Well, throughout the conference, what actually came out strongly was the discussions on commission. So, they had actually asked, agents had actually asked for a little bit more time that the board could consider, whether commission should be regulated or not. And I think the board has that in mind. And one of the other things that came out was advertising, ethical advertising. What is ethical and what is not ethical advertising? So what we will do now, we'll put a set of guidelines working together with FCCC, because they have the decree that governs, misleading advertising, misrepresentation. So we work together with them. They will set out the guidelines for advertising, and then we will put out to real estate agents and to the public as well, good information for the public as well.
So when we talk about commission, I understand that there's an association of real estate agents. Generally, when the discussion revolves around commission, what do the real estate agents think of it? Which way do they swing?
They would rather that it self-regulates, that they do commission is just regulated by whatever the the value of the property is, rather than the board setting out a.
And you don't? Do you agree with that self-regulation?
I would have to. I would have to listen to both the concerns from both sides. As a regulator, I need to listen to the concerns that have been raised by the Commission. But at the end of the day, it is the board who recommends, and then the minister makes a final decision to all this.
So if the minister decides that it should be regulated, is there anything, do you fear potential backlash from real estate agents?
Well, that has to take place. I really don't know at the moment what is going to take place, but there is a general reluctance to go down the regulation road. But then, at the end of the day, we'll have to do our consultations once again, and then we will see where to get from there.
Were there any particular issues or concerns that were raised by real estate agents or their companies, maybe from salespersons themselves at the conference?
One in particular, that's about unlicensed agents, the illegal operators that are around operating without a license. I mean, depriving a licensed agent of the ability to sell the property and get proper commission out of it. So we've had a lot of issues with that. We've received about 12 complaints, and we've reported the matter to the police. But then, that was one of the major concerns that was being raised by the agents during the conference.
Well, I'd like to dig in a little bit more about unlicensed agents, especially how to figure out and how to vet whether or not an agent or a salesperson is actually legitimate. But we'll be back with more after the break. Welcome back. Now, we had a very interesting discussion in the previous segment, but Ziad, you mentioned off camera something about the Real Estate Agents Association.
Right. So the association president, Mr. Vyasdev Sharma, he recently said that, quote, so many things are not addressed by the legislation. By that, he's referring, I'm guessing, to the Real Estate Agents Act. From your perspective as a chairman or a chairwoman? CEO, sorry about that. What are some shortcomings of the legislation?
I would say that this is a very old legislation because it's a 2006 Act, and we're living in 2018. So the marketplace has actually changed, and needs have changed as well. There's a lot of things to be done in the legislation. I agree. There needs to be a lot of changes, and the board is actually looking into the review of the legislation in the coming months. So we are actually looking into that. We will review the legislation. We will go out again and consult the industry, consult the public, and yes.
And in terms of the disciplinary powers that you have, going ahead from just reporting to the police, would you like to have some sort of prosecutorial power for real estate agents?
It's one of the lacks in the current legislation. We don't have the prosecutorial powers to actually, prosecute offenders. So what we do is that when someone is in breach of the Act, the police come in and they actually assist us in those cases, and they take the matter to court. The disciplinary powers with the board at the moment is basically to cancel and to suspend the licenses. But prior to that, they will have to do their investigations, do a thorough investigations and a hearing before they make those decisions.
Speaking of licenses, looking at something that was teased in the previous segment about unlicensed agents and unlicensed salespersons who are out there trying to, conduct unethical business. How do you regulate that? Because as far as I know, and you've mentioned before, with agents there's stringent measures in place before they're granted their licenses. But what about for salespersons?
The same requirement applies. You cannot operate or do real estate activity without a proper license or without a proper certificate of approval. So people are usually found or caught to be, acting as agents and complaints have been received through RealB, and then the matter in fact is reported to the police. But we've always been advising the public, and we've gone on air on radio as well, that one of the very basic things that a member of the public, an interested purchaser or interested vendor should do is just ask the person of his or her identification card. Because we have a RealB identification card which each and every person should carry right now, and it has the name of the company, and the validity of that particular card.
Does a salesperson need to have a particular specialist background knowledge before they can do their work?
At the moment, we do not have any, set of requirements for them.
So anyone who wants to become a salesperson can?
Well, not really that. We actually look into academic qualifications. We actually look into police reports. They need to have a clear police report when they apply. Not only that, there's so many other things that are actually associated with someone applying.
What about basic training when it comes to real estate practices?
Well, I was just coming to that. What the board has actually done is that we have actually engaged the University of the South Pacific, and in the future maybe some other training providers, to provide training for salespeople. They need to be qualified, and this is called continued professional development. So they need to accumulate a few credit hours, and then from there, this will ultimately affect the renewal of their licenses in the coming year.
And just before we wrap up, generally, what can the public expect from RealB in the coming future?
We have very, good plans ahead. We need to review our act, obviously, which was just been discussed. Reviewing the legislation is a very big thing, so we need to do a lot of consultations. We've been given budget for it, and we will do that, as soon as possible. The other thing is there is a greater need to educate the industry and educate the public. And the board is actually looking into doing that in the next few months.
Well, thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for your time. That wraps up our show for tonight, and if you wish to contact RealB Fiji, you can call them on 33000355 or email info@realb.org.fj or realbfiji@gmail.com. You can also visit their website www.realb.org.fj. Up next, My Say with Neman Indilai Batiki, and until next time, have a pleasant evening.
Good evening. I'm Neman Indilai Batiki of the Fiji Sun. Welcome to Fiji's first TV editorial show. In my say tonight, I'm going to speak on the walkout by opposition SODELPA MPs from Parliament on Friday. The walkout can best be described as political grandstanding. It was designed to appeal to the base instincts of the Itoke, the core support for SODELPA. It said, really, that SODELPA began its parliamentary term with boycotts and walkouts and ended in the same way. Their issue this time is they want the chiefs to decide who should be the next president as against who is the best candidate for the high office. We do not want just a figurehead, but someone who commands the respect and support of all people, irrespective of their ethnic, cultural, and socio-economic background. The president should not necessarily be a chief, but he or she has all these qualities and credentials that fit the role. Right now, it's Major General, retired George Conrate. He is not a chief and is non-Itoke, but symbolically he represents all of us. His illustrious career in the military, civil service and diplomatic service qualify him for this role. He has been a loyal and dedicated servant of this country. His military and service records speak volumes of the kind of person he is. And we need to recognize him and promote his example to our younger generation to emulate. In a nutshell, he is an exemplary role model. That's the kind of people we should be looking at when we talk about the next president, someone who has proven himself and herself in a wide range of fields. Mr. Conrate served under Leslie Niangarse's SDL government. In 2014, he contested the general election on a Fiji First ticket and won his seat. He was appointed by Prime Minister Voreqe Bainimarama as Minister for Employment, Productivity and Industrial Relations. So he has had the opportunity to see Fiji from different perspectives. That knowledge and experience give him an added advantage to take a holistic look at issues and make decisions that are inclusive. When Ratuepeli Nelatikau completed his second term as president, Mr. Conrate stepped into his shoes seamlessly because he was the right person for the role. He has done an amazing job in his first 3-year term, and he has delivered more than what was expected of him. Like his predecessor, he has visited and mingled with the grassroots people. It was therefore only fitting that he carries on for another term to finish off what he started. Not only does it provide continuity, it also ensures stability. I can only assume that the walkout by SODELPA MPs was a party directive to capitalize on the occasion and highlight its pro-indigenous policies, particularly the restoration of the Mbosilebu Bakturanga, or the Great Council of Chiefs. SODELPA has also referred to the 1997 Constitution. It's obvious that they are still living in the past when the rest of the country has moved on. Government's legal minds must have looked at the law and decided it was okay to convene Parliament yesterday to decide on the president. The National Federation Party did not join the walkout. It was being smart because it was pointless. It realized that whether it stayed or walked out, the outcome would be the same because the government side has the numbers. Secondly, it did not want to be seen on national television walking out with SODELPA because it could suffer from the political fallout. I thought SODELPA had learned from its earlier experience on boycotts and walkouts. Obviously, it hasn't. Nothing positive or productive is gained in boycotts and walkouts. Dialogue should be the key word. It's part of the language of responsible politicians who have the interests of the country at heart. Walkouts or boycotts are pathetically irresponsible. They are the hallmarks of failed politicians. In other words, there are a bunch of losers. I am Nemani Ndalembetiki of the Fiji Sun, and that was my say tonight. For more of my views, you can read the Fiji Sun. If you wish to share your thoughts on any of the issues I've raised, please email me on nemani.dalembetiki@fijisun.com.fj. See you next week.